Hello, I'm Rex Vokey, KE6MT, and this is my presentation for BayCon 2021, HF on a Budget. A little bit about me. I'm a hiker and a trail runner, and I got into ham radio back in 2015. I wanted to get more range out of radios and kind of had a vague idea that ham radio could do that. And once I got into it and got my license, started discovering all of the things you can do with ham radio, kind of that concept of the hobby of 1,000 hobbies that's been thrown around. And I really just started diving into it because not only does it have the electronics aspect of things, but there's just all sorts of magic things that can happen when you're talking about radio and communication over any sort of distance wirelessly. So it's always really excited me. Even to this day, I'm 5 years in, and it feels like I'm still new. And compared to some, I am. But yeah, I'm also the W6 or California Association Manager for Summits on the Air, and pretty active in Summits on the Air. So why do HF on a budget? Well, essentially, this is information I really, really wish I would have had when I was a new ham. Because I got into ham radio, and I was looking for a way to do HF on a budget. I tried things like Pixies and Chinese rock mic kits, and they're not very obvious as far as some of those aren't very obvious as far as how to put them together. And in the case of the Pixie, it doesn't provide the functionality you'll need to become successful with it right away. So I wanted to find a path that somebody just getting into this, or even somebody that's been doing it a while, could try out and have success with. So these are the basics that you'll need to do HF on a budget. A new golden age in amateur radio. This is a concept I think that's been thrown around on the ham radio workbench. I fully believe this concept. We are fully in a new golden age in amateur radio. It's you have great access to information. Availability of parts is like never before. And not only is there good availability of parts and the ease of ordering them, but these parts can do a lot. You have microcontrollers that you can program to do just about anything, including generate frequencies in some cases. So just a wealth of information, parts, well-designed kits. I'm going to get into this later in the presentation, but there are kits out there where you can go from very, very, very little knowledge to having a fully built radio at the end of it. So that's a great resource to have. That hasn't always been there. Learning resources, YouTube videos, blog posts, there's so much content available now. I guess the hardest part of it these days is finding what content that is going to help you. So, it's all there. So you just have to find it and sort through it. But, it's more information than we've ever had in the past. And it's a great combination with all of this other stuff to have our golden age. The magic of shortwave or HF radio. So this is the thing that really gets me. I love VHF, UHF, microwave. I love all aspects of ham radio, basically. They all have their magic, but HF has a certain magic to me that's, at least for the time being, the most interesting, because you can have direct non-line of sight communications over thousands of miles. And I threw a little illustration in here just to have fun. But these two stations are down in valleys. This station, whether it's a mile or 5 miles away, it doesn't matter. This mountain is in the way, and it's not going to be able to talk to this station with line of sight or VHF, UHF communication. But HF, with the right antenna, depending on the distance, is going to be able to, shoot the signal up into the sky, bounce it off the ionosphere, and it's going to land with this other station, and they can talk back and forth using that path. Low power can work with HF. It doesn't have to be low power, but it can work quite well when you're using a full-size antenna. There are a wide array of antenna possibilities. That's one thing that's fun about this is there's probably hundreds of different antenna designs you could use. There's only a few that I actually do, but it's a very, very fun aspect to explore. And there's a lot of tolerance in what you can use and how you can build these antennas. So say, for example, you need to build an antenna that works on the 40 meter or 7 megahertz band of HF. If you cut that antenna an inch or two short or long, it's not going to make that big of a difference. So there's a lot of tolerance in how you can build things and the parts that can be used for HF. And last but not least, solar cycle 25. We're getting into solar cycle 25. We're starting to get more sunspots and better ionization of the atmosphere. And I guess that could be considered, we have more solar radiation hitting us, but it's great for radio communications. So we're getting into that. It's going to become easier and easier to use HF to make these contacts. So how do we build this on a budget? You're going to be investing, the biggest trade-off here is that you're going to be investing time versus money. So you're going to take the time to build the equipment you're going to be using. You're going to be taking time to learn, and you're investing a lot of time in order to pull this off. So if you're somebody that doesn't have the time to invest in a hobby like this, then maybe it's not for you. But if you want to learn and build your own equipment and use your own equipment and save a bunch of money, this could be a great way to go. Some electronics familiarity can be handy if you're going to go this route, and definitely persistence and patience, because as smooth as this path may seem, there are always potential things you could run into that'll slow you down or stop you, and you have to be able to push through those. So what's needed equipment-wise? You're going to need basic electronics tools, a transceiver, of course, an antenna, key or a paddle, and by key I mean a straight key. That's where you form the dits and DAWs yourself. That can be as simple as a couple of wires touching together or an actual straight key. You'll need a paddle. I tend to go the paddle route. I have used a key, but paddle, I'll explain that a little bit. A paddle will, it'll tell the radio or the keyer. The keyer is something that forms the dits and DAWs for you. It'll tell that device to send strings of dits or strings of DAWs. So that's what a paddle is there. You'll need an antenna analyzer. It's a somewhat optional item, but at the cost these days for something like a nano VNA, which I'll talk about later, it's something that you might as well get. Various wires and cables and odds and ends, power and antenna support. And I'll talk about these in a little more detail here. So for the tools, you're going to want a soldering iron. A basic soldering iron will do, but it helps to have something a little more high quality. Nonetheless, if you get the $20 Amazon special soldering iron, you're still going to be able to get this job done. Screwdrivers, of course, are going to be something you'll need. There are screws involved in putting together the radio if you're going to be using a case. I suppose you could get away with not using a screwdriver if you're just soldering without a case. There are actually no, there's screws. You need screwdrivers. Multimeter, that's pretty essential to doing anything with electronics, but you don't need anything fancy there. Diagonal cutters, you're going to need those in order to make the cuts of the leads once you've soldered them in. Needle nose pliers, that's another universal. You might as well have that tool for just about anything you're doing. So get needle nose pliers. helping hands. You know those two little alligator clips that are you can articulate into the position you need to hold something for you? Those are really handy for assembling electronics. A magnifying glass is really handy, especially if you are starting to need reading glasses like I am. They can be handy for inspecting solder joints. Unless you have amazingly great up-close vision, a magnifying glass is a pretty good item to have. And a big hammer, because why not? All right, for the transceiver, I've tried lots of different kits, and this kit by far is the most user-friendly in terms of assembly and even using it. But the biggest aspect of this kit is that it's super user-friendly for the assembly of it. The instructions are very detailed. It's like Hans Summers, the designer of this. He basically holds your hand through the instructions. So your hand is held through the entire assembly of this. And with good persistence and patience and attention to detail, you will get from beginning to end of this build with a working radio. The initial radio he built was called a KE6MT, and I built one of those, I think it was back in 2018 or 2017. Great radio. It's essentially the same as what I have pictured here, but bigger. He doesn't currently sell the KE6MT, but does have the KE6MT Plus, which is a bigger version of the KE6MT in a bit of a different form factor, where the display is on the front. So when it's sitting on a bench, you're viewing it from the front. And then more recently, he released the KE6 Mini, which is what's pictured here. And this one I highly recommend. It's not as available right now. Since it's a fairly new product. They were all snatched up by people, including myself, and there's another production run in progress at the time of this recording. So you can order one, but you'll have to wait a little bit. If you're in a hurry, you can get the KE6 Plus, and that'll come right away. But this kit is high performance. It's a high performance radio. The design is excellent. You'll be able to pick out signals with the best of them. It's not a top shelf, IC 7300 or Elecraft radio that can pick out just any signal with all the interference. But this rig will do, 90% of that, and it's way more than adequate to make some contacts on the air and do a really great job. It's got tons of functionality, including actually, which I try to say don't count on these, but it's got a CW decoder. So it can actually decode Morse code on the air, assuming the signal's pretty solid and consistent, which is rarely the case on HF, but nonetheless, that's a feature that's available. It's also got a feature where that decodes what you're sending, so you can kind of check that you're sending your Morse code well. It's low cost. It's $55 or $80 with the case, plus shipping. And as I said, it's a really easy to build through whole kit. It comes with all of the surface mount components pre-soldered, so you're actually getting a partially assembled kit. You mainly do some winding of toroids, and then you solder components and stick it in its case. Really great kit. Can't recommend it enough. And for an antenna, I'm recommending an end-fed half-wave. There are tons of other options you can do. You can build your own dipole with just some coax and wire if you happen to have it. But this is the one I'm recommending. It's a kit you can get from QRP Guys called the QRP Guys No Tune End-Fed Half-Wave Antenna. It's a very long name, but very descriptive. You put this kit together by winding this toroid and soldering it in place, and soldering a couple of other components here, and cutting your wire to length. And then you use that antenna analyzer I was talking about to make sure you get the wire cut to resonance. There are other ways to do that, but I recommend doing it with an antenna analyzer because it will be quick and save you time. You do supply your own wire with this kit. We'll talk about sources for wire a little bit later. The only thing I don't like about this kit is you see the wire here is meant to be wrapped around this section in a circle, not a figure eight. And that makes it actually very difficult to deploy because you're essentially twisting the wire as you wind it around this. So a good thing to use, and a lot of people that do portable operations use these, is a kite winder. This is a miniature one. It's about the same size as this, but it allows you to do a figure eight wind of the wire around like that. So you're actually, just winding the wire around that way, and you can literally just hold this winder as you're pulling the wire off. It'll actually pull itself off. You can walk with the winder and it'll flop back and forth and unwind itself. So it's a much easier way to deal with the wire. So I may modify this actually. I might cut this section out and just wind the wire in a figure eight on here. We'll try that out, but I haven't done it yet. And for a paddle, you can go pretty cheap and do pretty well these days. There are huge range of paddle options out there, from this thing, which is $30, and there may even be cheaper versions of it. I mean, if you have a 3D printer, you can print your own using the plans you can search for online. And of course, there are super expensive paddles like Bengali paddles and others. But this thing right here, I got this off of Etsy. I think it was Morse code paddles or something like that. It's a good 3D printed design. It's a little bit bigger than my thumb, I think. So it's not a big thing, but it's pretty lightweight and it does the job pretty well. So you can find something like this on Etsy or eBay, or just search really for anything that says paddle or iambic. I actually prefer a single paddle, this is a double or iambic paddle, but you know, do what works basically. I know people have built their own. There's plans for that online. You can build out of wood and strips of metal. There's so many options. And the antenna analyzer. I believe there's a presentation about this in today's BayCon presentations. The Nano VNA, this thing's kind of become a little bit of a revolution in the last few years. It's a super inexpensive vector network analyzer, or VNA, and you can use this as a quote-unquote antenna analyzer. So there are a couple of different models. There's this smaller screen version and a bigger screen version, and there's one that's in a plastic case, and there's all sorts of different variations. So what you'll want to try to do is search for the kind of the model you want and make sure it's a reputable seller. There's a Nano VNA group where you can see kind of there are clones of this that aren't well made. You can see what the differences are. So with all that in mind, you should be able to find one for around $43 to $55 or so US dollars. You can go higher than that if you're getting the one that has a bigger screen. I find the bigger screen probably would be useful. It's a little bit tricky doing the touch screen stuff on this, but it's more than met my needs. It's a really, really handy device to have. With the latest firmware, you can actually even measure coax loss and coax length, doing time domain type stuff with it. So it's a very, very handy device. Wires and cables and other items. You won't need a whole lot to get running with the equipment I'm talking about here, but short coax cables can be handy with BNC connectors on them. various adapters like BNC to BNC, male to male BNC, different things like that. Those will be handy when you're dealing with this stuff. A dummy load can be a really good thing to have. In fact, I'd almost say it's necessary. You can get those from QRP guys and QRP labs and off of eBay. There's a lot of different kits, but search for QRP dummy load and that'll get you what you need. Antenna wire obviously is going to be necessary. I'm talking about like the end-fed half-wave antenna that I mentioned. That's a wire antenna. So you're going to be using lengths of wire on the order of tens of feet to build an antenna like that. Like a 40-meter end-fed half-wave antenna would be around 66 feet of wire or so. Headphones you're going to need. Just about any headphones will work with the QCX, and you're going to need a 3.5 millimeter stereo male-to-male cable to plug in your paddle or whatever you end up doing. You can sometimes paddles have you just directly wire them, but you'll need something to hook that up. And the places you can get these sorts of things, there's a place called the Wireman that's got a lot of wire. And Pactena has a lot of different items you can get. And also, if you don't want to build your own antenna transformer thing, you can get that from Pactena. Cables Online has a bunch of different cables and adapters. And of course, on eBay, you can find pretty much anything. Just search for it. Another supplier that I recently discovered is amateurradiosupplies.com. They have a bunch of different things as well. So lots of different places you can get things. You just have to kind of look around. And for power, if you have a 12-volt power supply of some kind, great. That something you can plug in that might be like a benchtop power supply that's current limited. That's great. But as far as battery power goes, this is something I've found. It's called it Talent Cell is the brand. They sell their packs on Amazon. And I think they start around 3,000 milliamp hours. But the cool thing about these packs is that they are a lithium battery pack that starts, that puts out 12 volts. So it's got a 12 volt connector that will put out the nominal 12.6-ish volts that a lithium ion pack will do. And a USB output. So you can use it to charge your phone or whatever you need to do. So these can supply more than enough power for the QCX and other things. I actually initially used this one on an FT817. And there's, lots of other options. Anything that can supply up to an amp and 11 to 14 volts is going to work just fine for the QCX. It's not terribly picky. But if you want to get the most power out of it, you'll want to go with something like 14 volts, up to 14 volts. There are different options. You have lithium polymer. That one can be a bit dangerous if you're using unprotected cells. So if I do use that, I tend to try to stick with the smaller ones. Lithium iron phosphate, that's this one here, lithium iron phosphate. That's a newer technology, lithium technology, and they are very safe, very tolerant of overcharging, undercharging, etc. By the way, don't do those things. And then good old SLA or sealed lead acid. Those are those heavy, those 6 or 12 volt packs you can find in alarm systems and the sort. Those are the least desirable, both in weight and size, and the number of cycles and actual capacity you get out of them. So if you have one and that's all you have to power your radio, that's great. Use it. Otherwise, try to go for something that's lithium based for lightweight and energy density. And then supporting that antenna, it's a wire antenna. You got to get it up in the air somehow. My favorite thing to use are these fiberglass fishing poles you can get on eBay. I search for FRP 7.2 meters. They're a little bit harder to find right at the moment. Usually there are a lot of options, but generally speaking, you can find them, and they're not actually 7.2 meters. It's more like 5.5 meters, but it's more than enough to get your antenna up in the air. You can usually get them for under $30. There's a picture of me using one here on a summit in Nevada. You can see my wire going up to the center here, and I've got a little ice cream lid cut out with a few holes in it to run the wire through, and it slides down onto the top of the fishing pole there. So the wire goes up to the top and then down off and tied off in the distance in an inverted V setup. But if you don't want to use a pole, or if you can't use a pole, if you're having trouble getting it set up or whatever, trees, if there's nearby trees, you can throw your wire over a tree, especially if you're doing QRP. It's not going to really affect things very much. And there are other extendable poles, so you can just sort of search for an option. But this is the least expensive and most efficient option I've found. Very lightweight. These poles weigh less than a pound. I can't remember the exact weight, but they're very lightweight. So that's all the equipment. But how do you actually do this? How do you get on the air? Here's what you're going to need to do. You got to get the equipment and put it together. You got to set up a place to do assembly, and I strongly recommend having a place that's undisturbed. So don't do this on your dining room table if at all possible. Set up a place that's going to be left undisturbed for days, because you may want to take several days to put the radio together. Some of the more simple stuff, you'll maybe get it done in under an hour, but the radio could span days. Depends how much available time chunks you have. Acquire your tools if you don't already have them. And I do recommend building the radio first. You'll want some of the other parts as you go along, but you can build the radio first and then get yourself set up to be able to practice the Morse code to get on the air. The QCX has a practice mode, so you can actually essentially put it in practice mode, and it'll emit the tones and everything for Morse code, but it won't transmit, so you don't need to use a dummy load in that case. I advise always having a dummy load or antenna hooked up to the radio in case you do accidentally transmit, because if you, on the QCX, this isn't the case with expensive commercial radios, but on the QCX, if you try transmitting without anything hooked up, the final amplifier stage of the radio can quickly overheat and destroy itself. So use that practice mode. And then the other aspect of this is, and maybe the most time consuming, actually definitely the most time consuming, is learning CW or Morse code. I practiced using apps like Morse Toad. That was a fun kind of game kind of app on a phone. It was both iOS and Android. But really the thing that finally got me going was signing up for CW Academy. That's there's a club called CW Ops, and they have a program called CW Academy. And essentially what that does is it sets you up in it's kind of a classroom type setup. So you have a couple of weekly meetings with your instructor, and you're given homework in between those. You do homework each day, and you have accountability for learning, which is really what I needed. I needed that kind of structure and accountability around learning so that I actually pulled it off. Another one I've heard about that I think is really great, and I really want to check it out further, is Long Island CW Club. They have classes and on-air events and Zoom meetings and all sorts of resources to help you learn CW. In fact, I do plan on signing up and improving my CW even more. So I'm definitely going to pursue that. But some key points are to practice every day if possible. When you're learning, that's extremely important. But practice in small, like less than 15-minute chunks of practice. You don't want to burn yourself out when you're learning this. So, do 2, 3, 4, 5, 15-minute chunks of practice each day. even if you only do 15 minutes, you're still going to make progress. It's that familiarity. And I can't stress enough to listen, because that's actually the hardest part of learning CW or Morse code, is being able to decode it. And, there's decoders on radios, and even the best of those isn't going to be as good as the decoder in your head. So just listen, and you'll get it down. Now, here's a really great reason to learn Morse code, and I have this point over here. 5 watts equals 80 watts. And what I mean by that is that 5 watts of CW is roughly equivalent in practice to 80 watts of sideband or voice audio. It just gets out way better. The signal to noise ratio for the bandwidth that CW uses is far lower. So you're actually going to be able to make contacts as if you were using 80 watts of sideband. So go for it. And then for the technicians out there, if you're getting into HF, and this is your path to getting into HF, here are the parts of the bands you can use. You can actually use part of the 80 meter band, 40 meter band, and 15 meters. And of course you can use Morse code or voice on 10 meters, but if I were just getting into this, the QCX I pictured is the QCX Mini that I built is for 30 meters. But if I were to build one band, and especially if I were a technician getting into HF, I would build it for this 40 meter band and use it there. It'd be super useful. You can make some pretty good local contacts and even some farther away contacts, depending on your antenna and the time of day on that band, but it can be really versatile. So I just wanted to point that out. You don't have to be a general or extra class to get into this HF stuff. You can jump right in as a technician. And that's all I have. So if there's any questions, let me know. If you want to reach me, you can reach me on email at rex@ke6mt.us. I have a website, ke6mt.us, and on Twitter, I'm at rex_ke6mt. Thank you, and have a good day.